everyone. Welcome to the next DJ Shan Azure Remixed. I am joined by Matt Canty once again. How's it going, Matt?
I'm great. How are you, Shannon?
Good, good. It's feeling a little bit like, I don't know, it's one of those things where it starts to feel better and then we kind of ebb and we flow. So hopefully at one point this becomes something maybe we could do in person one of these times.
Hopefully.
So if you've been following the series, Matt and I have been trying to teach an infrastructure person how to code, showing an infrastructure person how to embrace ARM templates, how to embrace code. We eventually will move down the path of talking through PowerShell, talking about Bicep, which is the newest flavor of ARM templates. And so today, our hope here is to start to showcase some of the extra tooling that may help you throughout the process. So
I think we're going to flip the script, right?
We are.
The student is now going to be the teacher.
We are. Matt taught me all of this, so if I screw anything up, we'll just blame Matt.
I'll take the blame. I'll take it.
So if you recall, Matt had built out a VNet. And the VNet is just a basic VNet. You took this from the Azure Resource Manager, right? Isn't that how we did that? Okay.
Yeah, we took it from the quick start templates.
That's what it was, the quick start template. And we've got just a bare bones VNet with 2 subnets. There's a couple of NSGs that have been applied to the subnet, right? We added that in, showcased item potency. And then here's the address space, right? So he gave me access to his environment so I can start to build out something from this environment. So I think what I'm going to do here is I will open up Visual Studio. Let's see, I can cut some of this. We'll create a new project. We'll pick the Azure Resource Group. So all of this tooling is built in. Let's call this 1 VM, 1 VNet. We'll call it like that. We'll hit create. So as you can see here, there's a couple of different templates that are showing up. So there's the Visual Studio templates. These are just some basic templates you could potentially build, right? So yeah, so as you can see, these are the quick start templates we referenced. I think it was the last time that we all connected. So it's every single template in here. So let's say you wanted to build out an Active Directory environment with a new domain. You could just literally click on here, click OK, and everything would build in the back end, which is kind of cool, considering that if you use something like Visual Studio Code, you have to copy and paste and sort of know how to handle things like DSC scripts, things like that. It's really up to you in terms of what you prefer. I wanted to showcase this because for me, I was used to more of a GUI-driven deployment, clicking next, next, next. This sort of helped me realize that what sits behind here, while it's a lot of code, it shouldn't cause anxiety because you've got things that can sort of cushion the blow. So it's a little less frustrating, I think.
Yeah, so you get a lot of what you need as far as the infrastructure already coded out for you. One of the great things to point out probably about the quick start gallery is that in order to do a pull request or to have code pushed in there from the community, that goes through a battery of tests, right? So, one of the things that the team that manages that repository pushes is having item potency in your templates, things like that. So these templates are, I'm not going to say 100%, but they're somewhat vetted for best practices when they are allowed to be pushed into the repository.
Right, and all you would have to do would be to adjust or alter your parameter file. So edit those specific fields, and in theory, it should, for the most part, deploy. There might be some extra pieces you have to troubleshoot, especially as you get into some of the more advanced pieces, but it's really cool, the idea that you could pretty much find anything that you're looking for in here to sort of build and deploy. I always liked that because of the fact you didn't have to go and copy and paste from GitHub. But I'm going to start with a blank template because you can also start with a blank template and just showcase some of what helps me realize that this isn't as scary as it might seem. So let's click OK. It's going to create the project. What I'm going to do here is once it creates the project, created it on a different screen, of course, is I am going to open up these files. Okay. So let's go here. So as you can see here, we've got the parameters, the variables, the resources, and the outputs. We just don't have anything tied in here yet. And then the parameters themselves, there's nothing here, but you can always add that after the fact. And I know that we have talked through, you don't have to start from scratch, but this is one of the ways if you were running into problems, like I've used this a couple of times. The reason that I wanted to show this was the way in which I use this is sometimes I forget the code when you want to add to a VM to an existing VNet. Sometimes our tooling presupposes you're building out a brand new virtual network, a brand new virtual machine. Oftentimes, you're adding a VM to an existing virtual network. And I can never quite 100% remember how to do it. So every once in a while, I'll fire up Visual Studio. And remember, you can also use the Visual Studio Community Edition, which is free, so you don't have to pony up the cash for the standard or enterprise license. So that's one thing to factor into the mix here. And I'll link to that when it comes time to publish the video. But notice what I'm able to do here when I right-click on resources. I can add a new resource. Well, let's see what we can add. So all kinds of stuff here, right? So you've got, custom script extensions, logic app, SQL database, nested deployment, public IP. So let's add a Windows virtual machine. I feel like that's something we could do, right? So we'll call it Windows VM1. This does require that you create a storage account. So this might be the opportunity to caveat the fact that going this route, you are using older APIs. So you may want to run a script that'll help you capture the updated APIs. I will showcase the script that I use here after we get this sort of up and functional. Let's see, I'll create a new one. We'll call it Windows VM1. Add that in. Notice how there's a couple of things that started to populate over here behind my active screen here. And then we can tie this to an existing virtual network, and it's pulling the wrong account. So give me 2 seconds here. Flip over to the right account. So now I am in my Microsoft account. This is my Microsoft subscription. However, I want to go to Matt's subscription. So let's go down here to Matt's subscription. And this is the virtual network that he built during the last video that we recorded. So we'll place it. Now we could put it in subnet 1. We could put it in subnet 2. It doesn't really matter. We'll put it in subnet 1, and then we'll hit add. And what's crazy is look at everything that just pre-populated, right? So the Windows VM1, that's the storage account. That's the NIC that's going to go into or be attached to the VM, right? We've got the VM name, the image publisher, the image offer, all these different things get populated from a variable perspective. If you wanted to change this, you easily could. If you wanted to truncate maybe Windows, maybe you wanted to call it, Windows name, you'd have to then adjust it down here. But the idea is that was pretty straightforward. I didn't have to do much of anything.
And how many lines of code did that add to your file?
Well, let's go down here and let's see. It added 140 lines of code, and I didn't type anything yet.
Pretty sweet.
Which is pretty sweet. It is. So nothing gets added to the parameters file, but I think after Matt showed why you would use your parameters, how to use your parameters, I think you could easily pluck some of this out of here to place over into your parameters file. I'm going to choose not to do that just yet.
I think actually right-click on one of your parameters. I thought that Visual Studio, and maybe it's over in the right-hand side window if you right-click over there. I thought Visual Studio had this little cool add parameter.
I am not aware of that.
I consult the documentation.
Yeah, definitely do, because I wasn't aware of that. So I'm going to save all of this, right? And there's going to be a couple of things that I'll wind up adjusting and adding and editing. Can you?
It looks like marketplace.visualstudio.com. There's probably they have a param generator, but that might, I don't know if that's for code or.
So it looks like you can't do it for Visual Studio. It's Visual Studio Code, right, Matt?
Yeah, yep, it's Visual Studio Code.
No worries, but I think that highlights you can definitely use both tools in the event that this makes sense for maybe certain types of deployments, and Visual Studio Code makes sense for certain types of deployments. You always have to code something and add certain things and copy and paste. It's just a matter of how you want to do it, right? So again, remember I had mentioned I have used this because sometimes I struggle with how you actually place a NIC inside of an existing virtual network. So look up here. Here's the VNet ID. And what it's doing is it's concatenating it's building out a resource ID with the virtual network resource group, right? And that's the resource provider. And then it's highlighting the name. So it's lumping that all together. And then the subnet reference, it's concatenating this variable and it's adding that subnet differentiator in there and then the subnet 1. So that's how it winds up being coded. And then in terms of your NIC, the subnet ID becomes that variable. So that's how I've been able to add a VM to an existing VNet. And it was something where I sort of struggled here and there. And we even tried to play around with Visual Studio Code to see if you could do it. So this is when I would use something like Visual Studio because there's certain engineering tooling that works better in one over the other. So I've used this on a lot of different templates that are being deployed to existing VMs. So I think what I will wind up showing next is how you query. So let's do this. So you'll first want to make sure you're logged into Azure PowerShell, and you can do this from Cloud Shell. I just do a lot remotely. I've gotten used to it over the years. You want to set your context. This is my Microsoft subscription. It doesn't matter what the subscription is, but if you've got multiple subscriptions, you'll want to make sure that you set your context. And this is helpful in the event that you don't know what your region is called. So if you're deploying to East US, you may not know that it's East US. You might think it's more than that. Sometimes some of the other regions in different parts of the world, I never know what they're called. So this is a helpful way to do that. And what this more does is it will show you everything within your screen versus sending it in like 5 different screens and you have to sort of scroll through. So I like that pipe to more because it allows you to take in what you're looking for. And then I believe it's enter, or is it? Yeah, it's enter will then cycle through the next screen, right, Matt? It's enter, right?
Spacebar? Is it spacebar?
Oh, is it spacebar? I thought spacebar did it line by line.
Maybe spacebar does line by line. Either way, it paginates it, right? So you can read it a page at a time to see what you're looking for.
Yeah,
because there are a lot of locations.
Well, and that's something that I, over time, and if you think about it, like I've been working in full-time at Azure full-time since 2016. So, back then there were less regions. Now there are a lot more regions. So if I never know what a newer region's called, I have no problem running this, but I will run it with the pipe more so that I get a chance to read everything on the screen versus having to scroll through like 3 or 4 screens to see what's on there. So I like that. And then we talked a little bit about the resource provider. So you may want to figure out, are all of these resource providers in the region I'm targeting? And in this example, I'm targeting East US. I do target East US quite a bit. It's relatively close to me, and it's easy to deploy things being a Microsoft FTE to East US than it is, say, regions that might actually be physically a little closer to me. That always evolves and changes, so that's why I wind up just kind of hitting East US or East US 2 a lot. But this way, you get a chance to see what resource providers show up in that region. So for certain things that aren't regionally available in every single region, this command may be helpful for you just to figure out, do you have things like Azure VMware Solution? Do you have things like private endpoints in this region? Do you have things like, compute? And compute's in every single region, but you may want to figure out exactly what's being called. So this is one of those things. So I guess let's do this. Why don't we run this? So we will run the selection. I'm already logged in, so the first one doesn't make sense to rerun. Okay, That's my Microsoft subscription. Oh. Let's go down to here. So you see how I'm getting East Asia, Southeast Asia, like all of these show up in that first one. Oh, it is spacebar. Spacebar does go to the next screen. And then that means enter would do line by line. So as you're becoming more familiar with the regions and how to call different regions, this quick command might be helpful for you. And as you can see, it's a number of screens. So, but I saw on the very first screen, East US was called.
Right there.
And it's East US. So cool. So let's use East US. And let's go down here to the end of this. Let's clear this out. Next one here. Okay, so if I run this selection, what it's going to do is it's going to format everything into a table. And maybe you can also pipe it to more too. So you could hit space more. Same sort of thing would work here. The bigger region, so I expect to see a lot of things. But so for instance, maybe you're looking for Microsoft.automation, Microsoft.compute. That's where you would know I can deploy in this region. Certain resources aren't deployable in all regions, so that becomes an interesting command to kind of keep in your back pocket. So
you should also be getting resource providers from partners in there too, right? It's not all Microsoft, is it?
Yes. Down here, we've got
NGINX.
some NGINX, Paraleap. Yeah, WANDisco.fusion.
Yeah.
And that'll change based upon the region that you're querying. So again, I'm querying East US, so these are the resource providers I'm getting for that region. So then, so what I'm looking for is I'm looking for an API for a Windows VM, right, or just a VM. So I want to query Microsoft.compute, and the way to do that is to sort of, I don't know what you would call this, Matt, because this is where it gets a little bit into the object-oriented, like data notation. Is that the right way of describing it? Where you're grouping an object and then you're extending different properties by way of adding a period and adding resource types.
Yeah. So when you put your little braces in there, your parentheses, right? You're wrapping that command and saying, "Hey, bring back this object." Once you end that with the right paren, you're saying dot this property, right? So, so the Azure Resource Provider object that you get from Get Azure Resource Provider is going to be more than just, say, the name of a resource provider, right? It's going to include the name, it's going to include resource types, it's going to include a lot of properties. So you're wrapping that command in parentheses to say, I'm bringing back this object, and now I just want this one piece of information from the from the object, and then of course piping that to your format table so that you can display it in the table.
Okay. So yeah, so then let's run this. Let's run this. So you're getting virtual machines, virtual machine extensions, you're getting location operation, VM sizes. These are all the different resource types you can control with this Microsoft.compute Azure Resource Provider. So for me, not knowing a ton about code, a ton about what you can actually manipulate, I found some of these exploratory queries interesting, just in the sense that there's a lot you can do. And if you get stuck, obviously find a Matt Canty, because they have, developer type folks have no problem explaining things to folks that are trying to make sense of how do you code some of your environment. But just the idea that you can code so much with an ARM template, for example, right? So then it comes down to, let's take a look at the APIs that are in that region. So we're, so this time we're double wrapping. So we're wrapping this, what we wrapped up here, and then we're adding a where object resource type name equals virtual machines, and we're exposing API versions
Yep.
from that. So it's interesting, the idea you can have a couple of different objects sort of wrapped together, and you can have that extended based upon trying to figure out what the API versions are.
Yeah, so you're basically wrapping this get Azure Resource Provider with your parentheses that say, okay, get me the resource provider resource types, and then you're piping that to where object. So you're basically filtering that out and saying, give me the one object where resource type name is a virtual machine, and then show me the API versions on that object.
Yeah. So yeah, so if you run this, and we'll run it real quick here. You'll get all the API versions in the region. It's everything from the newer APIs to the older APIs. So that's the one thing that I want to stress is if you're using Visual Studio, you may have to adjust and edit and change the API versions that your VM's using, especially if you're using newer technology, right? Something like private endpoints or something like VNet peering. You may need to think about factoring some of that in, but this set of commands, these sets of commands, very helpful in trying to figure out what that looks like.
Yeah, so let's learn how to fish real quick here.
Sure.
Because PowerShell is wrapper around an API as well, right?
Correct.
So what happens if that API changes and now they run this command and say there's not a resource types property anymore? How do you find out what that property is?
Could you use a wildcard?
So, well, no. What you want to do is set your object to a variable. So with that first thing that you have inside of your wrapped parentheses, just grab that piece of information and
This
set
one?
that, yep, and set that to a variable.
Okay.
And you can call it resource provider, say $resource provider equals this thing. Okay, and
Are
then
you ready
yep,
to put any quotation marks
nope,
around it?
we're not.
I
Just
should if you're right.
go ahead and run that.
Okay.
So this is a little cheat hack, whatever, because you have tab complete enabled, right?
I think I do.
So
Gosh, this would be good to check.
$resource provider dot and just start tabbing. So these are all the properties that you get from that object that is being created by running that command, right?
But what's weird is I don't see
resource types.
Don't. I need to maybe do this.
Nope.
It won't work that way? Okay.
Nope. So do a get member on that command. So pipe that. So $resource provider pipe to get dash member. So here's some more hacky stuff. So what you're doing is basically finding out. Yeah, go ahead and run it. So you're finding out what type of object that's created right there. So look at the type name is Microsoft.Azure.Managers.commandlets.SDKmodels.PS
There it is.
provider. So that's the object, right? And then these are the different properties. And look, you see resource types down there, right?
I do. I see it.
Yep. So these are the properties and methods that you can run on that specific object.
Very cool. I think I may have done this back when I was learning PowerShell, but it's one of those things where certain parts of it kind of go in one ear out the other if you're not using it regularly. I like that.
Yep. So what if we do the variable dot locations? Is that going to give us every location that supports that resource provider?
That's what it looks like.
That's sure what it looks like.
Wow. And
so yeah,
it's in every region, so we expect to see all the regions on there. That's crazy.
Yep. So when you see those little parenthesis things, just note, like when you see parenthesis things and a dot, you can explore those things by doing, setting that to a variable and then doing the tab complete or get member on that object to see what all properties, what all methods it supports. And maybe you can start hacking your own solutions together, right? If you're running into a problem, you might see what's available in there and then you can make use of that.
Well, and I think we have done that prior to my role switch. My current role, Matt and I are not on the same team, but when we used to be on the same team, we were running into some weird stuff with the objects and the way in which some of these objects are sort of I guess, put into the API and the way the API, you call the API and what properties you can get back. So we had to do a lot of exploratory work. And so I don't think we ever did like a get member because we were able to sort of figure out what we needed based upon some of the tab completes. But yeah, it's something where you have to just be sort of, I guess, not afraid to explore. And I think that's a pretty helpful thing to showcase, right? That you can literally just hit, resource provider space pipe get member, and that's a really helpful way to see exactly what you're able to extract on a little bit more.
Yep,
So,
and then you have the type name there, so you can grab that and Bing it, or use your favorite search engine to look up to see if you can find the SDK for that and see if there's a better description of what some of these properties are, right? So the world is your oyster, and as soon as you learn how to crack that thing open and start messing around, it makes your world so much bigger.
Well, and that's why one of the nice things is, as you become more comfortable with doing things like this, if you ever get stuck, make sure you've got a developer friend that can help you out, because that's so invaluable. There's a lot of things that you might not necessarily know that a developer just knows because they've been developing professionally for X amount of years here. So I've found that whole process super invaluable. So let's do this. Let's flip back to the active template, because the template itself does contain the right API. So if you want to take a look at this, 2015 0615. So if we were to, let's run this one more time just to showcase that it does actually work. And that specific API will, so it's right down here. It's a very old API, but it will work. And then something else I wanted to call out here, this deploy Azure resource group. So the PowerShell file that gets generated leans on the Azure RM commandlet library, which I think a lot of people haven't. Well, I think at this point, most people are using the AZ module, which is the go forward strategy. The one thing I'll mention is, and I'll link to this in terms of what I have on my GitHub repo or my GitHub account. I'm going to quickly just paste in. So this is where I'll be using the AZ module. So this will be helpful. But what this is doing, it's doing quite a bit of stuff, right? And this is, it's pulling it from an older resource group, but that's fine because we'll be able to tie it to the right resource group by way of deploying this. But it's filling in a handful of parameters, right? If you are building out DSC, it accounts for that. It will upload all of your artifacts to a storage account. It's got some try catch, some ways of stopping in the event something doesn't work right. It's got a validation function. And then this hash table, which I think Matt's a big fan of. Matt kind of wowed me at one point, showing that he had built out some hash tables. So you could even have your parameters be fed to your deployment process with a hash table, which is just basically like an array. It's probably the wrong, is it an array? Okay. So it's just like an array. It's not quite maybe.
Yeah, it's a dictionary. I mean, a lot of these different objects are go back to being built using arrays and things like that. It's a collection.
It's a collection of info, right? So the optional parameters can be passed in as a hash table. This is where the template file is, right? Where the parameters file is. This is where it's uploading your artifacts to a storage account. The cool part about it is it will create a storage account if one does not exist with an artifacts. What does it say? Like upload artifacts or ARM artifacts, something like that is the name of the storage account. So that's really helpful. Like for me, when I was building out some DSC stuff, I didn't know how to handle it with Visual Studio Code. So I used Visual Studio to sort of build out that frame of reference that I then ported over into Visual Studio Code. So there's a lot of interesting things that this actual PowerShell script does, right? And it's doing a lot of testing as well, so that you don't have to wait for, here we go. It's arm_deploy_staging. So it'll send everything there. So if you've got a number of different DSC, and again, we'll talk about that down the road too, but if you've got desired state configuration files that need to be applied to whatever you're building, this accounts for it.
Yeah, so a little bit of setup, going back to what you said about the hash table, right? Matt likes hash tables. He showed me how to inject the parameters with a hash table. That might have raised the question of why. Why would I want to
Oh,
inject
yeah.
the values with the hash table, right? And in the case where I was doing this, you want to automate your deployment as much as possible, right? And sometimes there are some decisions that ARM can't make, like, how many fault domains are supported in this region and how many fault domains do I want to add to my availability set, right?
Right.
So those of you infrastructure folks who are aware, availability sets allow your resources in Azure to be spread out across different fault domains and upgrade domains so that if something were to go down in one of our regions, your all of your resources aren't pinned to that one um, you know rack or whatever you want to call it, right? Pod, whatever. And so they're spread out so that in the case, the things that are under the same power or network or whatever, something goes out physically, then you still have machines that are running in that same workload somewhere else in the data center that aren't affected by that. So,
Right.
so you can actually, so what I've done in this case is say test the Azure region to see how many fault domains are supported in that region. And I can pass that number then into my template to say, I have a parameter that is number of fault domains. And so I pass that in. When I pass my parameters in as a hash table, I pass that in because PowerShell went and figured that out for me, right? Because there's not every region supports the same number of fault domains, right? Some support 3, some support 2, and even then, some only support 1, right? Some of the new preview ones. So, so the reason why you would want to use a hash table to pass your parameters in is so that you can make some of those decisions in PowerShell and have a more automated, but more intelligent type of deployment. Not just assuming that, hey, the data center that I'm deploying to has 3 fault domains. Because what happens if you try to create an availability set with 3 fault domains using ARM in a region that doesn't support 3 fault domains? Your
It
whole
won't
template
build.
goes,
Yep.
yeah, and
Yep.
then you're sitting there struggling to figure out what's going on. So so this was one reason to use a hash table to pass in different values for your parameters.
Yeah, and I think I like the idea of doing tests. So let's see, where does it? Yeah, so it's testing the path, it's testing the deployment. Um, you can do that without this script, right? That's always a possibility. But the script adds some interesting components here that I think help you out. So, like for instance, when I deploy this, you'll eventually see template is valid, which is helpful. There have been plenty of times that the template is not valid and it won't even try to deploy it because of all of the tests that it's running throughout here. So there's a lot more sophistication in here, and I definitely appreciate what it's doing. I just know that, for instance, I like when I copied and pasted in what I copied and pasted in, I clearly copied and pasted in from a different template. And what I'll do here is I will link to this in the show notes so that you can kind of see what it's doing. But like the prior to updating it, it'll say, Azure RM resource group deployment, which is probably not what you have installed on your machine.
Yeah.
And if you do, you should probably update to Azure.
Yes.
That's the go forward strategy, right? So that's the only thing that, you can always just do a control F, control R, right? You can find and replace all. I don't know. I think it's faster to copy and paste sometimes versus control F and then replacing all. So, so this is an updated script now. Again, it's using an older resource group of mine, but that's fine. We will be able to course correct that. So let's do this. Let's go through the actual deployment process. So look at that, right? How crazy is that? You just right click the actual high level solution. You click on new. And of course, it's pointing to my other account. We'll flip it back to my Microsoft account. And once this loads, I'll tie it to the right subscription, tie it to the existing resource group in Matt's subscription. And you'll see that it's loading from Azure. It's doing some probably reconciliation of cached credentials of mine on my machine. Okay, so it's now pointing to my subscription. Let's go down here to Matt's subscription. Let's go to VNet deploy. And you see that it's pulling my Azure deploy.json file, which is right here. And it's pulling the template. It's pulling the template file from the same solution. See this edit parameters? This is awesome. So look at what's not filled in right now. So let's change this to premium LRS. Let's call this.
That's the automatic parameter filling in that I was thinking about. Yep.
Yeah, which is fine. I didn't know if there was something, so it doesn't hurt to validate. But this is where you start to fill in the parameters.
Yep.
So VM1, let's call it. Are my initials? I can tell people that, right? I think so. Let's see. See, these are older OSs too. You can change that around. I'll just leave it as 2012 R2 data center. And then I'm going to do this very inappropriate thing that you should not do for real full-blown production. It's because otherwise it pops up another window that I have to input a password to. So I will just do this for purposes of the demo, but really doing it will showcase some great ways of using Key Vault in the future. And we can even go through what this looks like when it pops up the window.
Yes.
So let's save for right now.
In real life, never ever save your password to a configuration file.
This is going to be blown away almost instantaneously, I think, right, Matt? That's how. So because we're using these controls here, we can easily remove what we deploy. So I'm going to hit deploy because everything now should just match up. So hit deploy. I will move this up. Unfortunately, it's going to look a little tiny. There's no graceful way to make this a little bit bigger, but it's doing.
Ooh, this looks like fun.
Windows VM. What? It's part of a. So I don't think it likes my. I don't think it likes my storage account name. So we've got to change my storage account name, which is fine.
I just lost my green screen. I went to back up so I could read, and I lost my green screen.
No worries. So let's see. Let's flip here.
Thank the Lord for the power of editing. Let me make sure that
Oh, so it's in the actual. There's no parameter here. So let's go to the storage account.
Wait, Windows VM is, or a part of the name is trademarked or reserved word.
Yep. So I'm going to have to totally scrap all of this.
Windows, yeah.
So we can. So here, so I can say this. Okay, so it doesn't like the storage account name. So let's go and fix that. Let's take out. We'll leave that in. We'll just make this be something else. We'll call this Win Server 1. Let's call it that. In theory, that should get us what we're looking for. Notice how you can go back to. So it doesn't like the name I used. So fine. We'll change that. We'll call it Windows Server 1. Actually, we'll do storage. Call that Windows Server Storage Account 1. We'll leave it at that. We will save it. And then when we right click up the top again, you can go back to the same deployment. It's pulling up everything from the most recent attempt at deploying. Also, see down here, how do I upgrade my deployment script to use AZ PowerShell? That I think also links to a GitHub gist or a gist. It'll be the same thing that I'll link to in the show notes. So let's go to edit parameters. Yeah, see that you don't have any capacity to change the storage name. So in theory, this should work now because I've changed it to Windows Server Store Account 1. Leave it at that. Let's save. We'll run through the deployment again.
Missing deployment template validation.
Where is this showing up? Storage account. Name. Oh, hang on. It's going to be down here. Cat.
It's not Windows VM name. What's your Windows?
But that's what, so it's crazy. That's what it's using. So you know what I should do is I should change the name of it. So let's see.
In your parameter.
Yep. So that's what it's looking like. This is some good troubleshooting.
That's weird that Windows VM, like they pulled that string out of a big long name and said, hey, this is trademarked.
Windows VM name. Okay, so it's the variable. Hang on, it's up here. It's this one. So concat Windows VM 1. Let's call this, hang on, what did I call this? Let's just add this in here. Do this. That's what it is. It's the concatenation here with a unique string. That's what it's doing. So don't use Windows in the name of your VM or your storage account.
Or SharePoint.
Or SharePoint. Probably Exchange, but why would you deploy Exchange on it? I'm sure somebody probably wondered if they should.
I have a CSA buddy who will tell you a million reasons why not to.
Yeah. Okay. The parameters, we're looking good there. All right, let's try the deployment once more. Third time's a charm.
Yay. More. I like troubleshooting.
Okay, well, I changed this. So why don't I do this?
Storage account. Something's not. Oh, we got to follow.
This is what I had before. I took the name out, so I'll add that. All right, I took this variable declaration out.
Okay.
So I'll add it back in. This is always fun, troubleshooting on the fly.
Mm-hmm.
Let's try it again. Fourth time's a charm, maybe.
Well, what's the variable?
The variable, well, hang on. The variable now is Windows Server Storage Account 1. Maybe I should even reduce this.
Yeah, because your VM name is going to reflect that as well.
Well, like nothing's been built yet either.
Right, but if you look at everywhere that Windows VM 1 name is used, it's probably the name of your VM.
Okay, so let's see. So hang on. Windows VM 1 VM name. So let's go to the parameters, test VM 1. Yeah, that's going to show up as test VM 1. It's the idea that this Windows VM name, it concats
something alongside of.
Yeah, what did it not like?
Where is that being used though? If you have a parameter for.
It's being used for the storage account. So.
Can you not just change that to your parameter and just use your parameter there instead?
No, actually, it's in the VM. This is, remember, because we're using a storage account. So variables, Windows VM name 1.
Yeah, so it's using that variable in multiple places.
So if I were just to change this to, what does it not like?
I do not like how they do that.
There we go. Okay, so in theory, this should work because it's concatenating this here now. So let's try this. Let's see what we can do. Okay, so now it's loaded, And remember, we have changed this variable. So this should let us deploy it. There we go. Template is valid.
Template is valid. We like that message.
Yeah. So note to everybody out there, don't use Windows in your deployment. And I think the reason it got called out, it probably doesn't matter in terms of the VM itself, but I'm creating a storage account. And the storage account has to be globally unique still, I believe, right?
Yes.
So that's probably why we ran into those errors. And then I just incorrectly changed the name of the storage account, forgetting the fact that because we're using the older APIs, we're building this VM with a storage account. So things you don't really want to do. Oh my gosh. So we'll edit the parameters once this loads. There we go. We'll move this back to standard LRS because that's what works for the VM in the file. And again, even though we're troubleshooting, we didn't really put too much code in here. So let's hit deploy. What the heck deployed? Let's see. Let's delete this.
There's a VM sitting there.
Yeah, but it failed. You know what I'm going to do, Matt? Let's do this. So we'll scrap. I'm going to just create a brand new one. So this is going to be very much so me putting Humpty Dumpty back together again.
Yeah, I wish we could watch back to a certain spot and then just continue on from there.
Yeah. Well, we could probably save this. I could just, so once this is done, I could probably save this. Because I think now we've cleaned it up. Because it doesn't, I think some of that doesn't hurt to show, like troubleshooting it, like how do you fix it? Like, well, it highlights not to be afraid of deleting things and trying over again, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I was like thinking it through. I'm like, no, because then we're going to like make it be like happy path forward. And that's what I don't want this channel to be. Okay. So what we had determined was a number of resources deployed in this resource group. I have since cleaned it up. What should work now is deploying this. So after we've troubleshot this, right? Don't put Windows in anything that's going to be something like a storage account. And once you shorten up the variable, because this is what gets declared in the VM storage object, in theory, we should be able to move forward. And this will take a little bit of time here. Okay. So it's pointing to the right subscription, the right resource group. The parameters are still in there from earlier. Let's hit deploy. And after we've changed all of the storage stuff, in theory, this should work. So the storage account has been provisioned. It's now the NIC itself has succeeded.
Yep, and now it's going to check back every so many seconds to see what else has been done.
So the storage account is up, live and functional. The VM is now being built. So if you ever give error messages like what I showcased earlier, don't be afraid to go and remove whatever resources you need to. You can blow the whole resource group away. You can remove the failed resources and then redeploy. The beauty is it allows for such an interesting way of building your environment that, you know, error messages are going to be very commonplace, especially if you're building out something with a lot of code and maybe you're not as familiar with it.
Yeah, you might not want to blow the whole resource group away, though, if you're not creating the VNet, right?
Correct. Yeah. So in this instance, I wound up removing the failed VM and the storage account that wound up getting created. Oh, and the network card.
Yep. It was just a mismatch between the storage account name and
Correct.
what the VM expected as the storage account name.
Yep.
Since we modified a few things in the middle.
That's how you learn the best, right?
I'll tell you what, I failed so many times in order to learn.
I have so many resource groups that have a ton of failed deployments. So it looks like everything successfully deployed. So let's flip over here to the Azure portal in the VNet itself. We've got the test VM, the network interface, the storage account. If you go down here to disks, that's where you're going to see it's a standard LRS account. It's not a managed disk, so you could just enable this.
Right.
The recommended pattern would be to go find the managed disk code. But yeah, we've got a VNet in here. We didn't have to recreate the VNets from before. We didn't recreate or add anything, but you could easily add another subnet. You could add another NSG. We added the storage account, the VM itself, and then the network interface, which is living on the VNet. And I think it shows it. Yeah, so 10.0.0.4, test VM, IP configurations.
Yep, it shows you. Go back one screen. It shows you that it's on subnet 1.
Hang on. IP configurations. Yep, subnet 1. Thank you.
Subnet 1. Yep.
The GUI changes ever so often, so
it does.
And look how you can associate it to subnet 2 as well, right? So if you miss the mark and you actually said, oh gosh, I need to put it there, you could either rerun your ARM template with an adjustment on the subnet, or you could adjust it in the portal too. There's flexibility related to how you want to stand up your infrastructure, which is nice. So yeah, so I think that kind of brings us to the end of what we were planning to showcase today for how do you teach an infrastructure person how to code. And it was me kind of leading the charge and messing up some stuff, but fixing it.
Right.
It's very, very common, right, Matt? You fall down, you stumble.
Oh yeah, I'm not good at push-ups. I'm not good at sit-ups, but I excel at screw-ups.
So yeah, so stay tuned. We've got some more coming. I'm going on vacation, so there will be a little bit of a lag here, but nothing crazy. We should be able to probably finish up some more of these videos for you, and hopefully you're finding it really insightful. So feel free to subscribe, like, reshare, all of the above. And if you've got any questions, I will include how to reach Matt or I. If you're stuck, if you need some additional content, or if you have any ideas for things we should maybe cover before this series is up. So thanks very much, Matt, for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Shannon, and thanks everyone for tuning in.
Yeah, thank you.